Hello, shalom, shalom. Get comfortable, because I just wanted to finish up. Well, not finish up, but start on part 2 of my testimony. Um, about the many times that Yahoo has saved my life, and also fix this camera a little bit. One thing I don't want to do is curate my testimony. It should be raw and uncut. So forgive me if I'm a little rough around the edges, or a lot rough around the edges. That's always been sort of a superpower for me. That's a gift from Yahuwah, because of all the situations, suffering, and obstacles that I've overcome, and only because of Yahuwah's grace. So, I think I left off where my parents went to prison, and I went to live with my grandmother, Seminole Hills. She didn't live in the apartments. She lived in a house, which was the first house built on Seminole Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And my grandfather built the house for my grandmother and their children, and also my grandmother's, well, I'm not sure that her children from previous marriages lived there, but because I think they were already pretty much grown when she met my grandfather. And they also had a rent house across the street that my grandfather built for my aunt when she started having children. It was a garden before they built the house. So they had, I don't know, it was a lot across the street from my grandmother's house that was a full garden. So my grandfather was a very hard-working man, and they had together, I think, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boys together, and then they had 2 girls. And my grandmother, like myself, I don't know if she was married 3 times. I know she was married twice, but she also had 1 extra children's father. So she had 14 children, which I think 3 of them, one of them passed away when he was 26 years old. That was her oldest son, Charles, and he passed away in a car accident. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of how many children she raised, because she didn't only raise them, but she raised, before she started having children, she also had to help raise her brothers and sisters. She was the oldest of her family, and so she helped raise her brothers and sisters, and then her children, and then her grandchildren. So I wasn't the only grandchild that she raised. Well, I was the only one that lived with her full time, but I also had a little cousin that was also biracial, and she was by my grandmother's youngest son. They lived with us a lot of the time as well, but not full time, because her mother, she was still in the picture, and her dad, they neither one of them went to prison or anything, but uh, they had their own struggles and everything. So, just to give everybody an idea of how many children my grandmother raised, because I had numerous cousins, um, and the oldest three that I'm acquainted with the most are the ones that also, you know, had a hand in rearing me into an adult. And so, like I said, my grandmother lived in Seminole Hills, and that's where I had most of my childhood experiences after my prison parents went to prison. And so there were some early on, started to have some, bad experiences with people in the neighborhood and everything. Um, there was a first essay, and I call it essay because uh, it wasn't only myself that was essayed. It was the boy that was involved, who was a good friend of mine, and these lived next door to my aunt's house that was across the street from my grandmother. And I would go over there to play with him. He was my age, and there would also be girls and around and stuff. But one particular time when I went over there, it was just me and him and his uncles, and we were inside the house. Usually we'd be out in the backyard playing, but that time we were inside the house. And so somehow his uncles had us to go in a closet and take our clothes off, and had us to do things to each other. I was about 6 years old then, and so that was kind of my first sexual encounter. He was only six as well. We were the same age, so that's why I say that he was also assaulted. And also, uh, after that, we still played together all the time. We didn't. It was like this unspoken thing between us that we never ever talked about until we were both probably well into our 30s. And at the time, we were drunk. We had been drinking, but he and I never had any other kind of contact in that way, any kind of sexual contact or any kind of relationship in that way. We were always just friends, and we never spoke about that experience until, again, like I said, we were well into our 30s. And so that was, I think that began kind of my life of shame, and it was a trauma because I didn't understand what was going on, and I thought that they were safe. And of course my aunt and my cousins, I'm sure they thought they were safe because they let me go over there. And my cousins, they would never harm me in any way like that, and in a sexual way or any way like that. But so we, in that neighborhood, we had it was a pretty safe neighborhood other than that type of thing. And then there were also like older men that would attempt to draw us girls in and stuff like that. And I mean like old men, elderly men. And but by the time we were 10, 11 years old, we all knew better um, than to play into it or to get into go into anybody's house like that, or until later on, because you know when I became a teenager, I put myself in all kinds of uh, precarious situations in which I was essayed and kidnapped and uh, in danger for my life. And so um, one problem I had as a child after that happened was I would always run away from home, and uh, I would seek out families, you know, uh, where there were a lot of children in the house, where we could play and just play all the time, and they had kind of a family environment. My grandmother was very family oriented, but usually it was just me and her, except for when my cousin was there. And then the other cousins would come like holidays, and they would come on weekends sometimes, or my grandmother would babysit. By the time I came along, she helped to actually raise my older cousins and everything before I was even thought of. And so uh, I would seek out places to go, people's houses to go to visit, and I would, I would go, and then I wouldn't go back home until it was dark at night, and I would get in trouble for that. And my grandmother, she believed in physical discipline, and so I would get in trouble and I would get beat for that. And she would be very worried about something bad happening to me. And but anyway, so that would further drive a wedge between me and my grandmother, which there kind of was already a wedge there, because she didn't understand why I couldn't just stay at home, and I didn't understand it either, because she did provide a safe home and a safe environment, a very peaceful environment. Um, I guess I was used to being around chaos because my parents, all their, they would. There was a lot of domestic violence in the household when I lived with my parents, and then all the partying. There was always a bunch of people around doing everything, and they would take me with them to these gambling shacks. There's a street called North Denver and North Main in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is now considered a historical district. But when I was a child, all the houses on Denver and Main, they were all like gambling shacks, brothels, what we call buckets, or juke joints, those such things. And so I would be in those places with my parents, and I'd be outside playing, and there would always be something going on. And so I was always used to being around all that chaos. So I guess when I went to live with my grandmother full time, it was just so peaceful and quiet. It was like I had to seek out the chaos or something. But there wasn't, the homes that I went into, usually it was just a bunch of kids playing all the time, And so by the time, also my grandmother, she kept me in church my uncle was a pastor of a Baptist church, and so I stayed in church up until I was about 11 years old because I played piano by ear. My grandmother had a piano in her house, and that was one of the things that helped me um, to concentrate and to stay home and to be obedient. Was playing the piano and singing. And so I sang in the choir and at church and everything. And then there came a point where my auntie wanted her piano. She lived in Texas. It was her piano that my grandmother bought for her. Uh, and so she wanted her piano. So she came and took the piano. And that was like my only outlet. And so I think once she took the piano out of the house, um, it confused me. I wasn't able to focus in class anymore. I wasn't able to concentrate because it was one of the things that kept me uh, grounded and helped me to concentrate and everything like that. And also, uh, I stopped going to church after that, pretty much. And I started hanging out with friends. Like I said, by this time I just can't pretty much came and go as I pleased by the time I was like 10 or 11 years old. And so I started hanging around with the children in the neighborhood, and there were a lot of children in the apartments that I lived down the street from. So I would be in those apartments, and then I would go with them, and we would go on these crime sprees, stealing sprees, and stuff like that. And I got caught stealing when I was about 10 years old. Or no, I was 11. And when I got caught stealing, that was kind of like one of the last straws for my grandmother. And my mother was still in prison. But my mother came in contact with a program that was for children who had parents in prison. It was called TLC. And so once she got in contact with them, she had me to go to Oklahoma City and live in a foster home, which was a great foster home. The parents, the husband and wife, were really good people, and they had a daughter, and then they had another foster daughter that lived there. So it was a good place for me because I learned, that people didn't have to beat on each other all the time, for one thing. And I got to be a child, have fun, and, have real friends that didn't just practice criminal activity and stuff like that. So, which I had real friends like that in Tulsa as well, that I grew up with, that are still considered friends to this day. But most of my friends were mostly partners in crime more than anything. And so when I went to Oklahoma City, I was there for maybe a year before my mother got out of prison. I had turned 12 years old when she got out of prison, and I went to live with her for a while, which was good until she succumbed to, she relapsed. And so once she relapsed, that's when everything started to fall apart. And she ended up, when she went on the run, because of course once she relapsed, she started going on her crime sprees, various different crimes and everything. And so eventually she left me with some people that I didn't know at all. They were strangers to me, and I don't know if she knew them or not to this day. I really don't talk to her about it. But she left me with them, and she was on the run from the police. Still, she hadn't went back. She hadn't gotten caught yet, but she was on the run. So, the one thing that happened there is the lady that knew that I didn't know her at all, and that my mother had left me, and I was confused. I mean, looking back on any child, they would be, if you left them with somebody they didn't know and never came back and picked them up when they were 12 years old, a child would be confused. They would be hurt. They'd be, nervous, anxious, afraid. And I was all those things. And so she didn't like my tone one day. I was there for a few days. She didn't like my tone, so she just hit me in the face. And once she did that, I remembered my grandmother's phone number. So I called my grandmother here in Tulsa, and my grandmother sent for me. She sent me a bus ticket, and I think that's the only reason why I escaped the plans that they had for me, because I feel like they had some plans. The more I think about it, I think that they were going to do something to me, like traffic me in some way, or they had some kind of wicked plans for me, because they were definitely not advocates for children. They didn't take me in to help my mother. They saw an opportunity, and I know they did, because she did drugs too, but she just had a stable household for the moment. And there was a man that lived there that saw her hit me, and he didn't say anything. They were a biracial couple. The man was black and the lady was white. And I looked at him like, I could be your daughter, and you're gonna let this lady just hit me in my face, and I don't even know her. You can at least speak up and say something. He didn't say a word. And so when I think about that, I feel and I know in my heart and my spirit that they had some wicked plans for me. I didn't know it at the time. I just thought that I was just there. But when I think about it, I know that they did. And so I was able to get in touch with my grandmother. And because they knew that my grandmother now knew where I was at and knew that I was with these strange people, that's the only reason they took me to the bus station and put me on the bus with that ticket my grandmother had purchased for me there. And if it hadn't been for her sending for me, there's no telling what would have happened to me from there. But once I got back to Tulsa, I was not the same person at all. I mean, I had dabbled in little things and everything before I left Tulsa and went to Oklahoma City to the foster home. But when I got back, I was full blown. Like, nobody could tell me anything. I did whatever I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and I didn't realize the worry and the pain that I was causing my grandmother. But I just wanted to numb the pain that I was in. And so at first it just started with me hanging with my friends. Two of my best friends are twins. One's a woman and one's a man. We were kids then. So one was a boy and one was a girl. And the boy, he recently, they're a year older than me. So he recently, this year, back in the early spring, was murdered in Oklahoma City. He moved to Oklahoma City, but like he and I were closer than the girl was back then. and because we did all kind of crime together, like different types of crime. There were these guys that used to steal cars, and there was a house across the street from the twins, and they would leave the stolen cars back there. And so he and I would go get in those cars and drive everywhere. Every time they left one back there, we would go get it. And after they had taken, stripped all the music and everything out of it, that's what we would do. And then so of course I was smoking weed heavily at that time, and I had my first sexual experience that I consented to with their cousin, who was like 5 years older than me, but we were call ourselves in a relationship for some time before we did have that sexual encounter. And I thought that we were gonna be married. He was my first love, I consider. But of course I know I didn't know what love was at 13 years old. By that time I was 13. And so he ended up breaking up with me after we started having sex, and he went to a girl that was in high school and had a car and all that. But anyway, after that I just kind of went crazy and started experimenting with all kinds of drugs. Like anything anybody would offer me, I would try it, except for the only thing I wouldn't try was the needle. And so about that time, crack had hit in my neighborhood, and we saw two-parent homes go to no-parent homes. So all the kids in the neighborhood were basically raising each other. Now the twins, their mom, she worked at night. She didn't get on any drugs or anything like that. She worked at night, and that's how we were able to party and everything at their house all the time. And so, in the midst of me experimenting with all these drugs and everything, I would go to their house and pass out, and I would go to various places and pass out. And my dad, he got out of prison, but he was busy, with his life, and he got hooked on crack cocaine. And I would go back and forth living with him and his girlfriend and her children. And one time when my dad went to jail, she tried to kind of give me away to one of his friends and told me if I was nice to him, he would take care of me. And so I knew that was not right, because I had already been in situations where I was SA'd and everything. So I ran away from there and went back to my grandmother's house, and I never spoke about that to my dad and or my grandmother, because there's no telling what would have happened. And it was crazy. She was on crack at the time as well. But anyway, back to Seminole and hanging with the twins. So there was also an older man in the neighborhood that was probably in his mid-30s to 40. And me and the boy twin, would go to his house to do drugs and to drink and do all the things we couldn't do um, in front at my grandmother's house, or at really at his house, unless it was at nighttime when his mother was gone. And at this time, my dad was out of prison, and I think he was trying to get himself together. He was out of jail, and he was living with my grandmother and everything. And uh, so I had been experimenting with drugs, have smoking weed that was laced with cocaine, and no telling what else. And then I had also tried hitting the pipe with that older man. My friend, I don't think he knew that I had been experimenting with that man. And but it was just by the grace of Yah that I never got hooked on that. It never got a hold to me. And I always would wonder why, because I saw people hit that stuff one time and then it was over with for them. And like right now today, people that only hit it one time still have a problem with it to this day, but it wasn't my portion. Yahuwah freed me from that before it could ever get started, because that man, one time I was sitting over there with him, and he was preparing his pipe or whatever to get high, and he was talking to me, and he was like, it was another one of those intuitive situations where he was like, okay, if you want this stuff, you don't go to these young boys to get it, you come to me to get it. And I was thinking, that didn't sit right with me at all, because I was like, why are you saying that? Like, do you think I'm gonna be hooked on this and I'm gonna be going around like selling my body for this? This is what was going through my head as he was talking and fixing that pipe. And I was kind of just staring off to space, because I was just so lost in everything, just trying any little thing just to numb the pain, to escape from reality. And so I was spaced out at that time, just listening to him, but I was thinking these things at the same time. And he got done taking his hit or whatever, and fixed up some more and tried to pass it to me, and I didn't take it. I was just still kind of staring off into space, and he was like, don't you want to get high? And I was like, no, I'm good. And so I got up and left that night, and I did go home to my grandmother's house that night, because that really spooked me, because I had already seen so many people hooked on it. It was crazy the way people changed so quickly once they started smoking that crack. It was scary. The things that I saw people do for crack, and I knew that would happen to me if I kept smoking that, if I kept playing around with that stuff like that. So I went home to my grandmother's house, but I would still go to that man's house and hang out, because of course we could get, like I said, me and my friend, the twin, the male twin, we go over there and get drunk, get high, stay up for days, be still going in those stolen cars, driving all over Tulsa, meeting people jumping in the car with us, and we're just driving around, smoking weed, drinking. All this as just little kids, 13 years old. And so, I would go to their house when we would get done with all that. But first, my dad, he rescued me out of that house, that crack house where that man lived, and it turned into a crack house shortly after that. But I would still go there to smoke my weed and drink and pass out and So one day when I was passed out over there, I heard my dad's voice. So I don't know how. I mean, because I had been awake for like 3 days, just doing everything, all kind of drugs. I mean, all kind of alcohol, weed, just doing all kind of stuff. And I heard his voice though while I was passed out, and something just, I jumped up from where I was passed out at and ran to a back room and hid in the closet. But it's like my dad came straight to that closet where I ran to, and he was shaking me like, "What is wrong with you? Where have you been over here all this time? What have they been doing to you?" And my uncle was with them. I don't know if they did anything to that man or not, but he wouldn't allow me to come over there anymore after that. And I was so weak and so out of it. My dad had to carry me out of there. He carried me out of there to the car, and then carried me in the house, to my grandmother, in my grandmother's house. And so he rescued me out of that house, and we talked about it after that. But I was still, he couldn't tell me anything, and he wasn't the type to try to like beat me into submission or anything like that. And he would talk to me, but if he saw I wasn't listening, he would just stop trying. And so I would continue to go to my friend's house, because now at this point that was the only place I could go, because that man wouldn't allow me to come over there anymore after that happened. And so I would go to the twins' house at night after I would be so drunk and high and everything, because I couldn't go home like that, because my grandmother probably would have beat me. she didn't play with me. But so I would wake up, and this happened several times. They had an older brother that was 4 years older than me, who ended up being the father of my oldest two children. And I would wake up and he would be on top of me, touching me, slobbering on me, doing all types of stuff. And I would fight him off of me the first several times that it happened. But eventually I just gave up, or gave in to him, and we became a couple, which was, all we did was have sex. It's not like he took me out on dates or anything like that, until we got a little bit older, And he ended up getting me pregnant when I was 14. And at that time I had gotten too out of hand from my grandmother. So my mother, and because I wouldn't even talk to my mother anymore when she would call from prison, she finally got called. She was on Oklahoma's most wanted list, and everybody saw her in the newspaper, and they would make fun of me and all that kind of stuff because of that. And along with the I didn't get bullied anymore once I got that age, because I started fighting back and all that. But anyway, that's a side note. So I ended up, she ended up getting me into another foster home in that same TLC program in Oklahoma City. So, and by that time I was 14. And when I got there, she took me to the doctor because I was having some female issues. Found out I was pregnant, and she called and told him that I was pregnant, because I knew it was his child. And so once I found out I was pregnant, I did everything I could to get back here to Tulsa, and I ended up getting caught stealing when I was supposed to be at school, I was across the street at the store stealing candy, and I got caught. And that was terrible because I fought that lady with everything I had, and I was strong. I was agile and strong, and I fought that lady with a little bitty white lady, and I fought her with everything I had trying to get out of that store, you know, but she would not let me go. She held on to me and would not let me go. And so I ended up, the police came, and the lady that I was living with which was also a kind-hearted lady and sweet. You know, she did the best she could to relate to me and everything, but you know, my mind was somewhere else. And so she, you know, at that point when I got caught stealing and everything, she was like, okay, you gotta go. So she brought me back to Tulsa, and I wanted to get back here anyway so I could be with the father of my child. And but I ended up having a miscarriage with that child. And you know, I never did feel pregnant. I didn't know what it felt like to be pregnant then, but I know now because I've had 5 live births, 2 miscarriages, and 1 abortion, which I'll talk about later in another part. But anyway, so one day, like I said, I never had any symptoms, no morning sickness or anything like that, which with the rest of my children, I always had morning sickness, bad, horrible morning sickness. But with that child, I never did have any symptoms like that. So I think, you know, right off, I don't think that pregnancy lasted very long, but like a month after I got back to Tulsa, I started bleeding really heavily, really bad. Never did go to the hospital. I just wore pads until it was over with, which was a couple of days. And it was crazy. So, but then I ended up getting involved in a whole lot of other crimes. Instead of smoking crack and stuff like that, I was hustling in any way that I could, except for prostitution or the P word or whatever. And I would sell clothes, I would sell merchandise to people in the neighborhood, and you know, just to have some money. And I was still in a relationship with my oldest 2 children's dad, but he, you know, he was a lot different than I was. He was, you know, he had graduated high school already by the time he got me pregnant with my first pregnancy. And he had graduated high school, and he had a good job where he had gotten that job through a program. It was at an oil company, and he was kind of apprenticing as an accountant in their accounting department. So he had a really good job and everything. But me, I was still in the streets. I wasn't going to school. I dropped out of school completely. And I was just doing whatever I wanted to do. And so my grandmother, she just couldn't take it anymore. So the last time I got in trouble and got taken to juvenile, it actually is funny because that time I hadn't even done anything. I was just a witness to something. My friend, the twin, the male twin, he set a house on fire. By this time, I had been or raped. I had been kidnapped. I had been in some very traumatic situations, and so that's the reason why I was just, out there just lost. And surprisingly, the only grounding that I had was my children's father, the one that kind of manipulated me and essayed me into being his girlfriend, pretty much. It's crazy. But so she couldn't take it anymore. So when the fire marshal had already caught him, and I tried to talk him out of doing that. I told him not to do that because people lived there, but it wasn't anybody there at that time. There was this old man that stayed there that was kind of a vagrant or transient type person, but he lived there. Whenever he would get done out in the streets, he would go there. And so it's kind of like a vacant house, but there was people that would flop there. And so he wanted to break into the house at first, and I was down for that. I'm not gonna lie, we were gonna do that, and he couldn't break the window. There was a bunch of plastic and blankets and stuff over the window on the back door. There was a window on the back door, and he couldn't get all this stuff off, so he got the idea to burn it. And he just wanted to burn the blanket off of the door so that we could go in. And I kept telling him, if you do that, it's gonna set the whole house on fire, And he was like, I'm grown, I do what I want to do, don't tell me what to do. Now mind you, we're the same age. I was 15 by that time. And so I was like, look, I'm leaving, because he wouldn't listen to me. So I took off through a trail that was behind the house, and I went to my other friend's house because I was worried about him. So I went there and I just watched. I could see the house from her window, so I just watched to see what was going to happen because I was really worried about him. And he eventually came through the trail and I saw him, but the house was already blazing. It was up in flames. It was a 2-story house, and I don't know how it didn't catch the rest of the houses around it on fire. And so some children had saw us, which were younger than us, but they were neighborhood children. They knew us and we knew them. They were just younger than us, but they had saw us messing around, and so they told the fire people what they saw. And so they caught him first, and then they came to my grandmother's house and caught me. And I was like, I didn't do anything, but they arrested me anyway. And when they took me to jail that time, I stayed. I didn't get out that time. There were no more programs or anything like that they wanted to send me to. My family kind of disowned me for a little bit. They went before the judge and told the judge they didn't want anything to do with me anymore. My youngest uncle, and then my uncle above my dad, and I think he had actually went back to prison at that time. After he had rescued me out of that house, he went back to prison again because of breaching his probation or his parole requirements or whatever. And so it was my daddy's older brother and his youngest brother and my girl cousin that used to babysit me that was about 13 years older than me, uh, who also was the one that would blow weed smoke in my face to make me go to sleep when I was a baby. They went before the judge and told him that they didn't want anything to do with me anymore. They didn't want me back at my grandmother's house because I was stressing her out, and I knew that I was. I knew that that was true. So at that point, my my mother had got in touch with my maternal grandmother, who was raising my baby sister, which is it's a whole nother story. My baby sister is 4 years younger than me. We were separated when she was a newborn. She went directly to live with my maternal grandmother, who adopted her and raised her as her own child. That's her testimony. But I knew she was my sister, but she didn't know she was my sister until my grandmother had revealed it to her after I went to live with them. So my mother got in touch with her, and she had her to come pick me up, and they lived in a very rural area. It was a beautiful house. They had animals, horses, cows, all that type of thing. But I mean, I was not cut out for that kind of life at that time. I would love to live there now, but at that time, I was a city child, and I didn't want to live out there. And of course, I wanted to be around my boyfriend at the time. So he actually came out there. She let him move in and everything, but that didn't work out, of course. That didn't work out. He was 19, I was 15. And she ended up pulling a gun on him. She had a bunch of guns, and she wasn't scared to use them. And so she ended up pulling a gun on him, and we ended up fleeing from out there. And I went with him and left all my stuff and everything there. So I ended up moving in with him and his mother. Well, for a little while. But I would end up going back and forth between his house and my grandmother's house, and she was okay with that. My family, they were mad because she let me come back, but that's another story as well. But me and him ended up getting an apartment. I was still 15 at that time, and we got an apartment together and basically became common law husband and wife. And by the time I was 16, I was pregnant with my second pregnancy and my oldest daughter. And by the time I was 17, I was pregnant again, had a miscarriage. And then after that, by the time I was 18, I had my second daughter. And found out some devastating things about their dad. We had been keeping household from the time I was 16 or 15 until 18, back and forth and everything. But I found out some devastating things when I was 18. Ended up taking my children and leaving him, and again saved my life from a bunch of new threats. So that's just part 2 of how Yahuwah saved my life and brought me from a very, very deep pit in the miry clay, and I had to share that. So I'll come back with part 3 because there's a lot more.